Hey everybody, it's Adam back again from the Army Painter with yet another video tutorial. In today's video, we're going to further explore some of the characters that we've developed for a brand new product line that we're calling Gamemaster. Every party has that one Dwarf Cleric, right? Hjalgrum Iron Oath is a little bit different. He's stoic, proud, and fiercely loyal. Hjalgrum is always at the forefront of the fighting, and his protective spells have saved the party more often than just about anything else. Today we're going to take what we've learned in our Adventure Ready tutorial and our Level Up tutorial, and we're going to advance them with more advanced and refined techniques in this Masterclass tutorial. So let's take a look at some of the paints that we're going to be using today. Now that you've got your paints, go ahead and grab some clean rinsing water. I like to use my wet palette, and if you haven't gotten one yet, you should really give it a try. And go ahead and find your favorite brush, and let's get right to it. So we're going to begin by highlighting the skin, and for this we're going to be using Fair Skin from the D&D paint range, and just very small brush with very little paint on the tip of the brush, watered down of course for ultimate control. I'm going to pick out the most raised areas of the model, like the bridge of the nose or the tip of the nose, the lips here, and of course just the tops of the cheeks under the eyes. Now, if you find that you've added a little bit too much of the highlight and you've been using your wet palette from the Army Painter, you can always go back to the previous color. We based this skin tone with ruddy skin, so I'm going back to that just to blend this back into that highlight and make it a little bit less extreme. You can see that I still have all of the colors used in this series of tutorials on my wet palette. They've been here for a couple days. Most of them are still very workable. Now, I'm going to take some of the Rust Monster that we used to base coat and add our first highlight for our Dwarf Cleric's beard, and I'm going to mix in some of the Fair Skin that we just used for the highlight of his beard. So with that mix of Fair Skin and Rust Monster, I'm just going to pick out the most raised areas of that beard. Some of these areas are braided, so it's just a matter of applying a small dot to it, like you can see there on his braided mustache. And these braids, that he's got these big long braids on his beard down the side. Now, on the areas like this where you've got a long strand of hair, you just want to start at the top and very carefully pull that highlight down. If the paint starts to dry out on your bristles, that might mean that your paint isn't wet enough. Just apply a little bit more water, go back to your palette, and go ahead and work up those highlights. It's important that you have very thin and watered down paints for superior control when you're pulling these very fine highlights. And again, because we're using the Army Painter wet palette, if you do find that you went a little overboard with the highlight, you can go back to pure Rust Monster and just blend it back in nice and easily while the paint's still wet. They call that a wet blend. This is almost like cheating because you've got that paint still drying on there and you can make a nice gradient, a nice blend. Very simply, with just a bit of Lawful white, I am going to add a quick highlight to the parchment on our Dwarf Cleric's hip. Now I'm just going to add a small edge highlight there. Oop, mess that one up a little bit. It's okay. When you're working with very thin down paints that are watered down, it's very easy to correct your mistakes with just a flick of your finger. Now, instead of doing a normal edge highlight, I'm just going to draw some striations on this paper to give it a textured appearance. When you see the model up close, you can see the brush strokes, but from a distance at the tabletop, it's going to blend in and it's going to look like a very nice textured piece of paper. Moving on to all of the green cloth, I'm starting with a highlight of zombie flesh. Now, it's going to be a pretty drastic highlight when you first see it because it is a very muted gray. Typically meant for painting zombie flesh skin tones, obviously, as the name implies. Now, if you do find that it is a little bit too harsh to your liking, you can go back and clean it up with some of the Feywild Emerald, blend it back in. I'm going to showcase that here just to show you how it looks. And I'm just taking some of that Feywild Emerald, that brighter, more rich green, and blending it over top for a more seamless transition. On areas like the back of the shield, I'm just going to focus. I'm actually going to turn this upside down. So it makes it a little bit easier to work this brush into that corner. I'm going to focus my highlights at the bottom of the shield first. And I'm just going to leave that there to sit. Get a little bit more of that zombie flesh on my brush. It is nice and watered down. Give me extra control, make it super workable. And I'm going to the Feywild Emerald now, and I'm just going to blend this in. Nice seamless transition. When you're working with thin down and wet paints, especially on your wet palette, it gives you a lot of versatility and a lot of freedom and flexibility when you're working the paints on the model and on the palette. So we're going to repeat these steps all over the cloth areas on the model, including the little bits here on the front of his shirt. And of course, pick out the uppermost raised areas on his sleeves here. As there's not a whole lot of hard edges, we're just going to focus on picking out these raised areas and blending them back in for a very natural, seamless highlight. So I went ahead and finished off all of the green cloth and of course the green on the shield. Really happy with how this is turning out. And I'm not using any crazy techniques, just a brush. You can call it wet blending, but it's just making sure that we get nice gradation between our highlights and our base tones. If you ever feel like you need to go back and touch it up a little bit, like right here, no problem. Just you've got that workable paint on your wet palette, especially when you apply it in very thin light coats. For these Masterclass techniques, it makes the changes ever so subtle, just like that. So we're done with the green for now. I'm going to go about highlighting all of the leather on the model, and I've got Minotaur hide, and this is a great, nice, kind of a lightish brown. I really like this in combination with rigid leather, another one of our D&D Nolzur's Marvelous Pigment paints, and I'm just going to pick out the most raised areas on all of the leather bits on the model, like so. Very similar to the initial highlights that we did in the last tutorial, in our level up tutorial, but we're going to take it to the Masterclass level in this one. So while I will be applying an edge highlight to the hard edges, I'm going to take the Minotaur hide and I'm going to work it in at the uppermost areas, and that's because I'm going to come back in with a mixture of this Minotaur hide and some skeleton bone to reinforce some of those highlights in a minute here. So just go ahead around the rest of the model, find the uppermost areas and the hard edges and pick them out with Minotaur hide, like so. Especially like right here on the belt, just very carefully, you just want to draw a very thin line. And these little belt buckles, belt loops here, the edges of the belts, just want to work in a little bit of that Minotaur hide to the very edge. So go around and finish off the rest of the leather areas on this model, and I will show you the final highlight for all of our browns. Now with that mixture of skeleton bone and Minotaur hide, we're going to get a nice light tan color. And for this, we are only going to do an extreme edge highlight on the most extreme edges of all of the leather bits and brown areas on the model. Take, for example, here on the pouch, there's this lower piece here, and then around the outer and topper edges like this, and upper edges, I should say. And on the gloves here, I'm just going to take the edge of my brush and pull a nice simple edge highlight. Something that's really great on the fingers as well is when you're painting in the tips, you just take the edge of your brush and add a simple highlight, and you can see that it really makes those fingers pop out on the model. So just go around all the leather bits and very carefully take your time here. Just pull and add that nice extreme highlight and really make those brown areas pop on the model. And we're finished with all of the brown and leather bits on the model. And before we jump into highlighting the metallics, I've added a little bit of Lawful white to my palette, and I'm just going to highlight these stone pavers on the base. And I'm going to use the Lawful white on all of the colors of the cobblestone pavers, even this skeleton bone paver and this brown mix that we did. And this is just going to help to unify it a little bit more. Now, I'm not going to apply this highlight to all of the corners of every paver, just going to pick out a couple different ones just to add like simple highlights here, like the light is catching different pieces. It's very simple effect, takes really no time at all, and you just want to very carefully pick out one edge maybe of the paver and add a little highlight to it. And this is just going to help these stone pavers pop once you finish off the rest of your base, which we'll be doing later on in the tutorial. Here at the Army Painter, we are usually busy developing paints and hobby accessories, so it's not often that we get to jump in and develop characters. So this whole Game Master process and developing these characters to help tell the Game Master story has been a really fun experience. We got to work with a very talented, world-renowned illustrator and graphic designer by the name of John Gallagher, and he helped us out with some of the artwork for these characters and the Game Master box, which you'll be seeing not too far from now. So let's take a listen to what John had to say about our favorite Dwarf Cleric.
And for seeing where our good pal Hjalgrum ends up, like the rest of the party, I just really want to see what everybody adds to the experience, and seeing everything from the minis painted to 3D models later. However Game Master wants to go with it. Advertising art, whatever the case may be, it's gonna be interesting to see what everybody adds to each character's flourish. That's always something that I think is remarkable to see, and really a privilege to be a part of it.
Now, if you've been following along to all three of our tutorials in this series, in the Adventure Ready, we applied a base coat and a wash. In our Level Up tutorial, we reestablished all of the base tones with our first highlight. We're highlighting up with Masterclass techniques in this tutorial. And when we started, we really wanted a bright, almost white gold armor. So what I've done is I've taken a bit of our Lawful white that we have on our palette and our Silver Dragon, and I'm just going to find the uppermost areas, the largest and highest peaks of this gold armor, and I'm going to apply a little spot of that. In some cases, I will trace the highlight even further, like down the knee pad here, but the areas here, I'm just going to apply a very little bit, and this is going to help really push the brightness of this armor and bring it back to that bright white gold that we were aiming to get from the very beginning. Now, we could call this model done here. Everything's highlighted the way that we want to. All we need to do is put some tufts on the base and be done with it. But if you notice in John Gallagher's artwork that we have previewed, our cleric is shooting an orange orb. He's got some orange power that he's manifesting from his hand. And I'm going to show you how we can replicate that. I am going to be using an airbrush today, but before I do get to the airbrush part where we do this OSL or object source lighting, what I'd like to do is create some highlights. You've got a dark brown glove here, and what I'd like to do is pull out some extreme highlights on his hand where the power might emit and catch. Because what's going to happen is when we use our airbrush and we spray our orange layer over top, is that it's going to catch and it's going to sit more vibrant on top of these white areas on the model. So I'm just going to add these very simple highlights. Nothing crazy here, just very simple highlights. And I can go back to my palette if I need to, if I want to blend them a little bit and make them a little less severe or a little bit more controlled. So there we go. We've got this nice simple highlight like so. And I'm going to apply 2 drops to my airbrush. Next, I'm going to take a bit of Rust Monster. I'm going to apply, let's just say 4 to 6 drops. I like to work in 1 to 2 parts ratios, 2 parts paints to 1 part mixing medium. Now, the consistency that you're going to want is going to depend on your environment, where you live, how humid it is, and what pressure you're spraying at. So it's going to take a little bit of playing around with, but I always say that less is more. Start with just a little bit and mix it to get a creamy consistency, almost like skim milk for those of you that are milk drinkers out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my hand and I'm going to take some blue tack, simple poster tack that, your kids might have on their posters, or if you remember, we probably had a bunch of them at school. And I'm going to wrap around and essentially mask off the areas that I don't want to spray with this orange glow. Now, you can be very careful with your spraying, and I recommend that you are, but this gives us a little bit of freedom and a little bit of safety from spraying the rest of the model. So very simply, I'm just spraying the hand here, and you can see how I've got this nice orange glow, but the white parts that we highlighted are staying a little bit brighter in between or underneath, indicating that the glow is highlighting and radiating off of those hard edges. Once that's had some time to dry, I am going to go back to our Lawful White on the palette, and I'm going to find the source of this glow, and I believe it's coming from the center of his hand. So I'm going to just draw a, an odd-shaped circle in the middle of his hand. It doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be perfectly blended for the effect that we're going for here. And the reason why we're doing this is going to be the power source of this glow. So I cleaned up my airbrush and I applied a 1 to 2 parts mix of airbrush medium and fire new orange. This is a nice bright orange or dark yellow depending on how you look at it. And I'm just going to test my spray. See, there you go on my thumbnail there. I'm going to spray this right in the middle. And there you go. Now we've got an object source. The object source is the inside of his hand there of the fire new orange from my palette. And I'm going to reinforce the glow in the middle. And this complements the nice gradient that you get with the airbrush when you work with both techniques, the brush and the airbrush. I really like the effect because an airbrush is just another tool. Some people say that it's cheating. Well, in some ways it is. It allows you to get a lot of models painted faster and quicker, but it doesn't do all the work for you. You still have to get in there with your brush to pull out the nice details. And if you really want to make these effects work, you have to trust a regular bristle brush. So I still have some Lawful White on my palette, and I'm mixing that in with my Fire New Orange. And we're just making this focal point, this object source for our object source lighting. This is where the light is coming from, creating that glow effect that's radiating across our cleric's hands. So I'm just going to get a little mixture of this brighter yellow, and I'm going to apply this to the center of the yellow. And you can almost see where this power, this orange mystical power that he's conjuring up is originating from. And we'll continue to do this until we get to pure white in the center. Now, as you create this outward glow, if you find that you're getting a little too bright towards the outside, just blend it back in with your previous color. Doing a lot of blending on these models in these Masterclass tutorials. I really hope that you're enjoying them. I'm really enjoying painting up these Gamemaster characters for this new product release from the Army Painter. Can't wait to share it with you all. And now I'm just going to go right to Lawful White, pure Lawful White. And I'm going to apply that to the very center. And there we have it. There's our glowing orange hand from our Dwarf Cleric. And to finish off your model, I always recommend using our Battlefield's Tufts. This is a great way to simply add some realistic basing effects to your model. We already painted in the cobblestones on our bases, but I wanted to add some tufts so that there's some foliage moving around. You can use any of the tufts from the Battlefield's range. I'm using some Scorched Tufts and Mountain Tufts, and I'm just going to place a Scorched Tuft right there. I like the nice dark brown that you get from that. And I love how the Mountain Tuft has the reddish yellows and browns, and they complement very well against the Scorched Tuft. I like to place two different ones right next to each other, like so. And then I'll look around the model, give it a once over, and I'll go back. And this time I think we need another Scorched Tuft. So I'm going to apply this one right about here. That took all of 30 seconds to finish off the basing of the model. With the Battlefield's Tufts, really saves you loads of time and gives you a great realistic effect for the base of your models. Thank you for tuning in to this third and final installment of our Hjalgrum video tutorial series. I really enjoyed painting up this dwarf model for you, and I hope that you enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed painting him. Remember that you can find all of the paints and products that we used in this tutorial from your friendly local game store, your favorite online provider such as Amazon, or at www.thearmypainter.com. Now remember that the magic of miniature painting is that it can be as simple or as challenging as you'd like it to be, but with the right techniques, you're sure to achieve some great results. We'll see you next time.